Well, beloved, we are ready to start Daniel chapter 1. So we're ready. We got it. So it only took us 4 weeks or so, but we're there. But today I want to remind us again about what the whole book of Daniel is about, right? It's about the Messianic Jubilee that is coming. He is focusing us upon the Christ, the Messiah, who's going to Jubilee and take back the inheritance from the other gods and the other nations back to himself, his rightful inheritance, the one that he gave away in Deuteronomy 32, rightful authority to others. He's taking it back. And what we're going to see in chapter 1 of Daniel, we're going to get the whole chapter, believe it or not. And we're going to just Lisa said, put on chin straps and let's go fast. So we're going to be doing that. But chapter 1 is sort of a condensed view of the exile. It's not necessarily about Daniel and his character and those things. Daniel is going to sort of represent Israel in the first chapter. And we'll lay all that out and we'll get there hopefully eventually. But I want to remind you again that it's in a chiastic structure, right? We've got parallelisms as they lead to the main point. And when we looked at Daniel's, the whole book, this is kind of two chiasms turned on their side, but you get the gist of it. The things in blue are the hinges, are the points that Daniel's trying to make. And if we read Daniel in a linear fashion, as we do today, that very Greek Hellenistic way, that you have a start, a middle, and then your climax at the end, or your conclusion at the end. If we read Daniel that way, you're going to not read Daniel correctly. You're going to miss what the writer is trying to do. You've been in conversations where you're talking with someone and the other person isn't understanding you. And then somebody chimes in and tries to reword what you're saying to the other person. And they don't even come close to what you were saying. You're like, absolutely not. That's not what I was saying. We don't want to do that to Daniel. We don't want to read Daniel and come to a conclusion or making points that he's going like, that's not what I was talking about at all. That was not my point. So I want to remind us of that because remember, we're up in the first red part where the kingdom, remember, is being destroyed. The temple is being desecrated. The people are being removed. And we have that same thing at the end, the desolation of the temple. And if we read Daniel in linear fashion, it ends horribly. But Daniel's saying, I'm not reading that way. I'm reading to the hinge point in the middle, where the Ancient of Days gives to the Son of Man all kingdom, all dominion, and goes forth. That's where he's wanting us to go. So when we think about these other nations, we're going to read them as the Greeks and the Persians and the Medes and the Romans and that sort of thing, and the Babylonians, and think of them strictly as nation states. Ancient people are all going to see that there are supernatural beings behind these things, right? Remember Daniel praying in the latter chapters? He's praying that God would end the whole thing. And what happens? Gabriel comes to him, but Gabriel's held up by a supernatural being, the one that is over Persia. So they're tracking on this all over. We, in a modern era, very scientific age, have trouble with it left and right. So try to, when we hit these things and they're talking about kingdoms, think not about the peoples, but about a spiritual being in control or leading that kingdom. So with that in mind, we want to sort of work through, even as we think about the statue that the rock comes and crushes, the gold, the silver, the bronze, the clay, the iron, that he says, I destroy them all at once. They all come to an end. And if it's just about the Greeks taking over the Romans or the Greeks taking over the Persians, then the head, would be destroyed by the chest, and then the chest destroyed by the stomach, and the stomach destroyed by the legs. That's not the way Daniel presents it. He's presenting it in that fashion. Now, I wish Brother John was still here with us because he is the absolute master of dad jokes and puns and wordplay. He has to be descended from Daniel because Daniel is going to use wordplay and puns and these things all through chapter 1. He's trying to get you to trigger onto certain things, and he's going to get us there. And with a little help, I think we can absolutely do it. So he's going to wordplay on things like the word cut off, He's going to wordplay on vessels. He's going to wordplay on the seed. He's going to wordplay on these things. And we're going to try to follow him in that. Okay. So we're going to quickly read the first chapter all the way through to remind us of the whole story. And then we'll kind of come back and we'll try to cherry pick some things and play us into this narrative of how does that relate? Because if you just read chapter 1 as a story about Daniel being taken into vegetables and all that, you're going to miss it's about the whole thing, about the whole exile. Excuse me. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without a blemish and of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's place and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and the wine that he drank, and they were to be educated for 3 years. And at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among those were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear the Lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. And for why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? You would endanger my head with the king. And then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, go. Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter, and he tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in the flesh than all the youths who were ate at the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine and their drink and gave them vegetables. I had another picture for that one, but they were all ripped and muscle, and they're like all around the table. And I thought someone's going to yell at me for that. I'll just stick with this one. So they don't eat it. They don't eat the wine, the vegetables. They only eat vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And at the end of time, again, the word is cut off, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all of his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Why bring Cyrus into the story? He's not going to be in there. Even if you think Darius is King Cyrus, which I'm going to be of that camp, we're not even going to get to him until like chapter 5. Why the injection here? In your mind, if you just think about chapter 1, what does it encompass? The 70 years of exile, right? Jehoiakim go in, they return under Cyrus. The story about the food and everything isn't necessarily about Daniel. It's representative of what's going to happen in the exile, right? They're going to go into exile. They're going to be required to be found faithful. They're going to have to trust God. They're going to receive a test. They're going to be tried, but then they're going to eventually be restored. Because under Cyrus is when the command goes back to rebuild Jerusalem, right? And all the people, well, some of the peoples go back, and we read that in Ezra and Nehemiah. Excuse me. Thank you, Elias, for giving that to me. Now, we want to first look at Daniel's refusal to eat and how it relates to the entire exile, and not just the exile, but about the meta-narrative, the one that we're saying, the main thought, that he is taking away dominion from Elohim and restoring it to God in his rightful way, right? So he says, I don't want to eat the food. And why? Because he says, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, with the wine that he drank, and therefore he asked the chief eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Now, if you deal with any kind of commentaries, any scholar worth his claim is going to say, we don't understand what's defiling about the king's table. It doesn't match up with anything in the Levitical laws. Him eating the meat and drinking the wine, there's no violation. They don't know why. And partly because of the way it's translated. This word defile is not the same word that is used in Leviticus to speak of a ceremonial defilement that the priest could have, like touching a dead body or eating an unclean food or a lizard jumping on your shovel, that type of stuff. It has nothing to do with that one. It's not the same word. This one means more of estrangement, almost as a synonym of cutting off. And if you read it like this, see how it changes. Daniel resolved that he would not estrange himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to estrange himself. Now, young people, you might not know what estrangement means. What does that mean? It means to be separated from. Well, we want to ask, separated from whom? Daniel's saying, if I eat of this, I'm separating myself from something or somebody. And I'm going to say that he's saying two things, that if I eat of these things as a picture, that it is estranging me from God and from the people who are in exile. Because remember, God told Jeremiah, don't resist Nebuchadnezzar. He told Israel, he told the king, he told all the Jewish people, Nebuchadnezzar, the entire world, man and beast, has been given into his hand. Don't resist him. In fact, go into bondage, go into slavery, go into exile, and build houses and have marriages and have children and prosper the nation that I send you. We read those things before in Jeremiah. So for us, we want to say, okay, now what is going on here? Now, remember, Isaiah writes before the siege. Jeremiah writes during the siege of Jerusalem. And remember, he never goes into exile. Remember, he's preaching to those who are there. Now, Daniel is listening to Jeremiah. That's how he gets the book. That's how he knows to count the days. That's how he knows how to do it. Ezekiel is the same age as Daniel. Daniel goes in the first wave. Ezekiel goes in the second wave. Both are in exile in Babylon. You need to start to put these pieces together in the main picture to see how they interrelate and how they talk to one another. Because when we start to ask, well, why would he not defile himself and why would he only eat these things? Because he says he doesn't want to estrange himself, that he tests your servants. We only want to eat vegetables and water. Again, the translators, I admire their work and they do a phenomenal job, but they're not helping us here because they're taking away the wordplay that Daniel is using. And the word for vegetables is actually the word seeds. Daniel says, let us eat seeds and water only. That's all we want to eat. And it's a wordplay, right? He's going to play with your offspring being seed, because that same word for seed can be offspring or it can be the seed. It can be those things. And he's going to play with that. Now, for us, Remembering Daniel is in charge and he's wanting to be associated with the people in exile. And these seeds and water are the food of exile. Okay. And he's saying, I am seeing God's punishment and I'm not trying to get out from underneath it. Meaning, would it be right for him to lavishly eat, or the people of Israel to lavishly eat while they are being punished, so to speak, in exile? Right? If Daniel really loves his people and loves his God, he says, I would rather stay right here with them and suffer with them. Right? Because if I just, gave you some wild hyperbolic story and say like, well, what if there was a massive hurricane coming down upon us and, it's starting to rip around the shutters and pull the roof off and Rosalind and little Elizabeth, they're huddled in their houses. The wind rips it all apart and they're crying and fearful and the power's out and it's hot and it's terrible. Where would their family be? They'd be with them, right? I mean, if you were a good mother, you would be with your children. You wouldn't go off to some lavish party, right? I mean, you wouldn't get on the phone and here's Elizabeth, oh, I'm so afraid and it's terrible and I'm so frightened. And the mother just go, well, baby, I love you too, and I wish I could do that. But wait a minute, the DJ just started playing my song. So love you, okay, bye. Nobody would do that. They would go if they loved them and suffer with them. Daniel is saying, I'm going to suffer with them. And that was purely a hypothetical, out of my mind, just random story. So this wordplay on the veggies is going to be with the seed. Now, when we think about the framework of this, we want to ask ourselves of the exile. It can't be that when I'm saying it's Daniel representing the exile, this isn't his behavior through the entirety of his exile. Because in chapter 10, we have him where he's praying to God and he's fasting. And he's not fasting away from seeds or water. He's fasting away from, Daniel says, in the morning of 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, I didn't eat delicacies or meat or wine didn't enter my mouth. So this isn't in chapter 1 speaking of Daniel's behavior through the whole thing. For those who would say it's a ritual thing of you would be spiritually unclean if you ate the king's food, then Daniel sold out. Daniel is now unclean if that's the case. And it's not the case, right? Because when we think about how this is going to tie together, we want to think about, again, who else is going through this? Ezekiel, right? And God makes him. Ezekiel's of the priestly tribe. He's not of Judah, and he's left there, and he's told to do certain things with the exile too, because this seeds and water is what God commands to Ezekiel and saying, you too are going to tell the people of Israel what they're going to experience while they're in exile. And in chapter 4 of Ezekiel, this is after God anoints him, and he says, I want you to be a picture of Israel, and I'm going to bind you up, and I'm going to have you lay on your side for 390 days for Israel. Then I want you to flip over on the other side for 40 days and do these things. And he's to do this. And you shall set your face towards the siege of Jerusalem. Right? So this is going on actively. Use your arm bared. With your arm bared, you shall prophesy against the city. And behold, I will place cords upon you, so you can't turn from side to side of the other, till you have completed the days of the siege. And you take wheat and barley, and beans and lentils and millet and emmer, and put them in a single vessel and make your bread from them. During the number of the days that you lie on your side for 300 nights, you shall eat it. And so he's saying, as a representation of your exile, I'm going to bind you up, Ezekiel, and I want you to make your bread. Now, he is not quite the cook that Leon is, because the fuel he uses for this food is not pleasant at all. So he's going to seeds and water. That's what he's going to eat and drink, representing the food of exile. Daniel is on the same program of saying, I'm going to associate myself with Yahweh, not Marduk, not Nebuchadnezzar, not Babylon. I'm with Yahweh and with his people, and his people are eating seeds and water. That's why Daniel doesn't want to estrange himself, separate himself from God or the people, even though he has available to him all these meats and availability of those things. And it's not just the seeds, and here's the get that wordplay of exile. It's also the food of wilderness. So both Daniel and Ezekiel are both eating seeds and drinking water during the exile. And remember the people of Israel, right? When they came out and they disobeyed and they wandered in the wilderness, how did they eat? What did they eat? And this is the interactive part, right? We know that. Manna. They ate manna. What did manna taste like? Yeah, right? In Exodus, Moses rips on the people because God told him, each day go out and just collect up what you're going to eat. Don't take more. If you need more, take more, but don't eat. Don't keep anything to the next day. But before the Sabbath day, you're going to collect a double portion. But the people didn't listen. They went out there and they were like, I don't necessarily trust God, because exile is about trusting God. Wilderness is about, do you trust God? And they collected more. And Moses is like, you people, I told you don't do that. It rots into worms. And this is the whole part where he's on the seventh day, you can find verse 29. See, the Lord has given you a Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you the bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in a place. Let no one go out of his place on it. So that the people rested on them. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. And it was like seed. Again, this metaphor of exile, the metaphor of out of where your normal place is. And it's not tasty. Everybody goes like, oh, I just wish God would send manna to me. No, what does he do as soon, we just hit this, Joshua, what happens? That was one of the test questions. Hey, when is it cut off? Soon as they touch the real food, soon as they get the real food of the land, seeds cut off. Same thing with exile. You're going to come back into the fruit and the fat of the land. He's going to say, I don't want you eating seeds in the land. I'm going to bring you back and I'm going to feed you abundantly. In fact, I'm going to sit you at the table of the Lord. I'm going to feed you in a way that you have never been fed before. And so when we're here, we're going to say, okay, well, now this play on words with seed and with people and with exile, there is more play on the words. So in the very first part of the chapter, when he's saying the vessels of the house of God, and they bring them to the land of Shinar. We're not going to discuss that today, but when you hear land of Shinar, bing, buzzers ought to go off. If you're an ancient person, it lights up. Shinar. Even in Joshua, when we haven't hit that part yet, have we? We're Achan. What does he steal? Steal some stuff, some silver and everything, and then go. And he has what? Some clothes from Shinar. Yeah, right? And what's Shinar? It's Babylon. But why use two different terms? Why call him the king of Babylon? Why don't you call him the king of Shinar? He's using that to make you trigger on other things. And Shinar goes back to the original Babel, right? And we know what happens at Babel. That's where the nations were divided up according to the Ben Elohim, all right? The sons of God. The others were given their thing. And so there's a trick right there. He's going to go say like, oh, I want your brain. Yeah. But he says he takes some of the vessels of the house of God. Now, the English doesn't help us here because he's counting on us knowing that when Israel was in the wilderness and even into the promised land, there was a tabernacle. It's not till David that they begin to start to think about building a structure for God, a permanent one. And it's going to be done under Solomon. In the wilderness, in those times of the judges and all those things, it's a tabernacle. It's a tent. And the presence of God is manifested by the ark. Once they build the temple, you almost never hear of the ark again. When you talk about the presence of God, the prophets are going to use the gold of the temple as sort of that metaphor for the presence of God. The vessels, the lampstand, the golden instruments. So when he says the vessels of the house of God is equivalent to saying, I'm taking the ark, I'm taking the presence of God out of Israel. Now, there is a very critical play on words with some of the vessels. It doesn't actually say that. It says the vessels are cut off. The word is to cut off, not some. But the interpreters are saying, well, it means to cut off a portion. And so he's taking some of the gold. But he's talking about cutting off. And this is where Daniel is immediately in the very first sentences cluing you in. I'm going to be doing something else with the wordplay, because you wouldn't speak of vessels being cut off. That's not what happens. People get cut off. Nations get cut off. Trees get cut off. Vessels don't get cut off because they're not a whole. They're not a thing. And he's going to play on that cutting off of the vessels, and he's going to connect it to the people, right? Because the king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief of the eunuchs, to bring some of the people from Israel, both the royal family and over, used without blemish, and da. And we have said before that the eunuch has had his testicles removed. His seed-bearing ability has been taken away. And Daniel and all of his friends are given under his authority, because his job is to be over the other eunuchs. And I know people don't like that, and scholars will say, well, there's nothing in the thing that says it had to be that way. Just because they did it that way doesn't mean they did it to Daniel or his others. But I'm going to say the wordplay doesn't work if Daniel is not a eunuch. He is, because even the word for, I get my clicker to work. They are the royal seed. The word is seed, not family. It's royal offspring. It's the same play on words about the seed. And he's saying, what's happened to Israel? The kingship has been cut off. You have no heirs coming. You are without legacy. You are done. You're out. Daniel's out. But now he's a picture of Israel. They have no strength. They have no seed. They have no thing. But something else is coming. And it's powerful. It's what's going to be here when we talk about this royal seed being cut off, that these vessels are being cut off and this seed is being cut off, and he's tying them together. He's going to do it multiple times throughout Daniel about this cutting off. And we'll get those when we get there. But so now, where do the vessels go? Where does the royal seed and the vessels go? We go into Shinar, which is Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar puts them in the house of his God, and he placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Now, he says it twice because he wants you to pay attention. And he's saying, now he took the presence of God and he put it into the temple of Marduk. And he's in the house Marduk. And that for us should trigger some things, right? As we have spoken in the past, if you say, when we look at the world around us and we say, my future is in front of us and the past is behind me. And the Hebraic expression is not that, right? We've learned that many times, that when the Hebrews speak of the future is behind them. And in fact, the word, the latter days or the last days or in that day, those terms all are the behind days. They literally are translated the behind days. But that makes no sense to our modern thought process. And our Western way of thinking is like, the future can't be behind you. It has to be in front of you. But the Hebraic expression is, you need to look in the past to see what God has done. And you are walking backwards into the future, trusting what you see God has done, he will do again. And so you are sort of walking blindly into the future, but not blindly. He's going to use the same thing with Belshazzar when he's having his whole thing. He's forgetting and he's looking future and he's not looking into the past, Daniel said. You should have been looking backwards and this would have never happened. But we'll get there too when we need to. So with that in our minds, we say, okay, so now these vessels are taken into theirs. Is there anything else in your minds where you would say that would parallel that? Is there ever a time, as you look back from Daniel, back to Genesis, that the vessels of God have been taken into a foreign god's place, temple, and given, right? Well, our first clue is going to be when he says, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. So he gives the vessels and the king into Nebuchadnezzar's hands. When we read through the Judges and we read through Samuel, all the time of the Judges, you'll see it multiple times. It's like a repetitive phrase. And the Lord gave the people, the vessels, into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. And the people were again given into the hand of the Philistines for 20 years. And he keeps saying they were given into his hand, speaking of the people. But there is one event in Samuel, if you remember the people of Israel are fighting the Philistines, and Eli's the high priest, and he's got two sons that are terrible, right? Phinehas and the others. And they're like going to say, oh, we can't beat the Philistines. Let's go to Shiloh and we'll get the ark of the Lord, right? We're going to get the ark and we're going to take it into battle. And they do it. And the Philistines hear the rally cry in Israel. They're going, oh no, we know exactly what that is. That means that Yahweh is in the presence of his people for battle. And we know he slaughtered the Egyptians. He destroyed the gods of Egypt. That's what's going to happen to us. And so he says, unless you guys all want to be slaves, you better man up and take care of your business and get into fight, get into war. And they do. And they slaughter Israel and they capture the ark. Right? And now the ark goes where? Into exile, into Philistine, right? Goes to Ashdod. And what do they do with the ark? The presence of God. They take it in, the vessel of God, and they put it in the temple of Dagon. Dagon is the Philistine fish god, who does their little thing. And then what happens? When they come in the next morning, there's the ark, there's the vessel of God, there's the presence of God, and look what's laying down before it. Dagon, someone has pushed him over, and he's laying there prostrate in front of the ark, in front of the vessel. And what do? Oh, that's bad news. Pop him back up. And then what happens? What happens? That's right. The next day, they come back in the next morning, and Dagon is destroyed. His head's cut off. His hands are cut off. The cutting off of the hands has a lot to do with that, opening the mouth ceremony. And even when Nebuchadnezzar takes Daniel into captivity, he's actually fighting Egypt, and he just picks up Israel on the way back to Babylon. Because while he's over there, his dad dies, Nebuchadnezzar, right? And he has to go back and be crowned king. And when he goes back, he has to take the hands of Marduk, his God, the vessel that represents his God. And so when Dagon's hands are broken off, you can't take his hands. You can't take his head. And so, boom, he's destroyed. Now, how does this relate to us? Right? Because when they do destroy him, they get rid of the ark, right? There's all those plagues, and then they make things. And when they send the ark back, do they send it back just by itself? Anybody remember? Right? He says, oh no, we better make an offering of an apology. And they make gold images of rats and whatever those tumors were. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd like the model for that, but and he sends it back with riches, back greater than it came. And so when we say, okay, well, how does that matter to us? Because when we think of that, how does it matter in Daniel? When you see Daniel as the vessel by which God is putting himself, right? When he interprets Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, multiple times, Daniel says, it's not me. It's God speaking through me. I'm just a vessel type thing. It's God. Multiple times, Daniel has to say, it's not me. It's God. I'm just the vessel, so to speak. And what happens after he gives the dream to Nebuchadnezzar? Susan and I were talking about this, and she was disturbed that it says that Nebuchadnezzar, after he heard Daniel give the thing, he falls down on his face. I was going to put the scriptures up there and we read it, but I figured the reading would be too long. It says Nebuchadnezzar falls down on his face. What king does that? You're king of the world. And you're going to bow your face to the vessel that has the presence of God, not the little gold stand and the little lampstand. He's playing on words and saying, I'm alluding to the foreshadowing that the people are going to be the vessels of God in the future. And that's what's going to happen when this whole meta narrative comes to a peak, is the people are going to be the thing, not the gold, not the temple, not the city. The people are going to be the thing. And he falls down in front of his face and he worships him, it says. Holy moly. And then he what? He gives him robes and he raises him to power. So what happened after Dagon fell the first time? What happened the second time? The Dagon vessel was shattered. It's broken. Well, what do we find in the very next story? Right? We find Belshazzar, the representative of Marduk. He is the one who has taken the hands of Marduk and is his avatar in the world. He is the one ruling. And what happens to Belshazzar? The description when we get there is going to be horrific. But he talks about him coming apart, his bowels opening up and his knees being shattered. And then what happens that night? He's destroyed. He's absolutely destroyed. No more. And then what happens to the vessel? Just as the vessel from the Philistines was given gold and honor and sent back into the promised land, back and restored to the people, what's Daniel? Daniel's under Cyrus. Belshazzar gets his head chopped off. He's dead. Does Daniel get in prison? Does he get killed? No. It says, Darius says, no, sir. You are running the show. I'm going to give you honor. I'm going to give you glory. I'm going to give you gold. And I'm going to give you more than that. I'm going to send you back to your people. Not you personally. I'm going to send the vessels back. Right? And he gives that decree. Cyrus says, go back, build the walls, build the city, build the temple. And he sends, and he says specifically, go into the treasury. We read that when we did that in Wednesdays, right? And he says, and get the vessels of God and send them back. But here's the wordplay. Oh, slide down. Daniel is representative of that seed, and that seed is cut off. He has no natural seed, and he, being that vessel, is put in the place of honor and restored and glorified. And he is simply just a foreshadowing of the next cutting off, right? Because the next cutting off is going to happen later in chapter 9. And this time it's the Messiah. It's the one to come. It is the second Yahweh. And that Yahweh is cut off. He's wordplaying. Daniel was cut off. He's cut off. But what happens when he is cut off? Does Jesus have any natural seed? Neither does Daniel. But he represents. Now, he has given us seed, right? And he is cut off. And he's doing these things. And it just says Daniel destroyed the gods of Babylon. Jesus is not just destroying the gods of Babylon. He's destroying all the gods. He says, I'm going to make a public shame of all principalities and authorities and powers and spiritual things. But that's not all, right? Because when he comes, as we've spoken before, it's at the Passover, right? And the Passover redeems the firstborn. it redeems the seed, the first offspring. That's what firstborn actually is. First offspring, first seed. He redeems the seed, you, me. And he didn't do it just to save us from hell, because now the presence of the one who, his seed, now has the presence from Daniel 7. So when he takes from the Ancient of Days, that cutting off, he is then rewarded with gold and honor and things. Just as Daniel's that vessel, Jesus is that same vessel. And it says in that's chapter 7, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms of the whole shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. And his kingdom shall be an everlasting, and all the dominions shall serve and obey him. The vessels, just like Daniel, got to go into exile, into the world, so to speak, and be the representative of God and be that vessel of God to take dominion, to take back what is God's. So Jesus mirrors that same thing and says, I'm now taking you, and you are my vessels, and you are going to go forth in power and authority and dominion. And just as God went to exile on his own first, right? When he goes into Philistine, Dagon's temple, how many Israelites go with him? 0. God fights that battle alone. And then he says, let me give you another picture. I'm going to go into exile again. I'm going to be the vessels that go into exile, but this time I'm going to let my people go with me and share in the exile, and they're going to be my vessels, and I'm going to be in front of them and in them. And Jesus does the same thing, right? He's going to say, how many of you died on the cross? None of you. At least that I know of. He does it alone. And then he says, guess what we get to do now? I'm going to ascend to the Father. I'm going to take dominion. And now you, the vessels, get to go for me into Babylon. You get to go in and take dominion and kingdom like Daniel did. You're to go in, and it's not a cakewalk. It's not ease and comfort. I mean, you don't get carried to heaven on, clouds of ease, as the song says. Some sail through bloody seas. You think it's all pleasant for Daniel and them in exile? No. Do you think it's all pleasant in the Christian experience when he says, guess what? You're my vessels now, and you're going to go into the temples of Marduk and Dagon, and they're going to fall in front of you. They're going to be broken in front of you because I already did it. That's what's going to happen. Those kings, those other images, bearers of their gods, are going to fall in front of you like the king of Nebuchadnezzar did to Daniel. They're going to be shattered like Belshazzar in front of you. And now you, beloved, get to stand in Vero Beach with no king, but a culture that is absolutely against you in every way. And you get to take dominion. You get to be that vessel. And you're going to have trials. Did Daniel have trials? Did the other 3 boys have trials? Trials. Testing. You could die. But he's saying now the new vessels are the thing that's on the scene. That's why I did the Passover. It wasn't to save you and bring you to heaven and to save you from hell. I did the Passover because I was disarming the Elohim. And now you come out of Egypt and you're going to go into the promised land and destroy it. You're going to take victory, snatching it out of their mouths constantly, and they can't stop you because I'm the one doing it. That's what Daniel is leading us to. Spoiler alert, I should have said. Spoiler alert. That's the whole purpose of Daniel, to point us to Christ and that dominion that we now experience in his life here. Let's pray. Speak up louder. I'm deaf. Okay, we shall do that. Father, that we may be all children before you and be unwavering and unhesitating to ask even for the simplest of things, that Michael and his sister would not be sick. But Father, we sit as your children with the maturity as children too, being asked to be heirs, to be rulers, that we are called to rule in your stead and to take victory. And though we would always ask for ourselves an easier way and comfort in things that we just don't like in this frame, but Father, we ask that your kingdom would come. Come through us as you ordained. Come through us in the Spirit as we knit our hearts together. And as the world sees our love for one another, they will know that the Son of Man has come to take back that which is rightfully his. And we're thankful we're part of that inheritance that was taken back. Father, bless us. Bless us and loose our tongues to speak of the greatness of Jesus Christ. And it is in that same name we pray. Amen.